Hello.
Howdy. Oh, we're recording.
Multiples and in backgrounds of other people's. Like
It's-
Emily, you're in the background of Jordan, and so I see you in two different spots, and it's a wild thing. All right, folks.
I'm gonna ask you, sorry, just really quick. Sorry, when we had our session with Sam, just if we have any questions, do you have a specific way that you want me to like put an X in the chat so that I don't interrupt what you're saying, but get attention? Like, how would you like us to intervene with that?
I want you to interrupt what I'm saying.
Okay.
I want to seem more friendly than Sam. I want to seem friendlier than Sam. I want you to like Sam. If Sam was like, "Don't interrupt me," I want to be team like.
Oh,
"Don't interrupt
absolutely
me."
not. I just felt like, oh, I don't know how to not awkwardly do this. So,
No,
okay.
Do it
Well, thank
awkwardly.
you.
Yeah, we're here to embrace the awkward.
Sounds great.
Does that sound okay?
That
All right,
works for
party
us.
people. Sounds great. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. Last two sessions I've done, it's been like super tricky and horrifying because I'm on a new screen or on a new computer and it's difficult. So bear with me as I start. Does that sound okay? Awesome. All right, can everybody see that okay? Cool. Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about leading through DE&I. There's only a limited number of folks that I see on my screen, and so as I start asking questions, I'm going to be relying on those folks to make sure that you're keeping me honest and on track. My name is Aisuri Vasquez. My pronouns are she and her. And I work with the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. If throughout this presentation there's anything that you want to share, if there's any information that you feel uncomfortable with, if there's anything that you need me to elaborate on, please feel free to unmute yourself, drop it in the chat. I'm sure you could send me a private message if you don't feel comfortable voicing it out loud. Whatever is your preferred method of communication, we're going to go with that. But my hope is that throughout this session, each of you walks away knowing a little bit more about implicit bias, about microaggressions, and about what you can do as RAs to build a more inclusive and equitable community. Does all of that sound fair? Okay, so I do these types of sessions a lot with all the different kinds of student groups. Maybe some of you have been in a similar style session to this one with me in the past. If you have, don't ruin it for the other folks. Stay with me and reabsorb the information. But that being said, I'm going to be asking questions. I'm going to ask for feedback. I'm going to ask for participation. If at any point there is just extreme silence on the end, we're going to play a waiting game. I'm very, very, very good at this waiting game. I'm much better at this waiting game than any of you will ever be at the waiting game. So I will stare at my screen until somebody decides to participate. Does all of that sound fair? Awesome. Okay, so why are we having this session? I want to start off with that question. Why are we talking about DE&I?
All right, we have a response over here in honors. Daniela, get that mic over there.
As RAs, it's important. This is an important part of being able to build a community. You can't build a community if you're not being inclusive of everyone.
Yeah, I love that. So as RAs, it's part of your job to build community, and that community has to be inclusive. What else?
We have
Do we
another one.
Do we have Javier exercising over there?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
He's our hype man. Jenna, go ahead.
I feel like a bunch of people come from different backgrounds and you need to make sure to educate them, even if they are ignorant, like not intentionally, but making sure, you know, using the correct language and pronouns, different types of stuff for that is really important to respect everyone and keep the community like kind and stable.
Yeah, I love that. And so trying to make sure that we're building spaces where, hey, there are going to be folks that don't have your same background, and we have to be inclusive of those folks. There are going to be folks who maybe have different experiences and identities than you do, and trying to be mindful of existing outside of your own identity. What I'm going to ask all of you to do today as participants of this session is to think beyond you. Whenever I was a college student, I was very, very selfish. I was a college student here at WVU over in Davis, and I had a very singular experience, but I'll talk about how I was selfish. Because over in Davis, it's a very homogenous group of folks that are over there. And I didn't see myself represented at Davis. I was very frustrated because Davis didn't have a lot of Hispanic women. I was actually the only Hispanic woman in my cohort. And so what that made me do is be frustrated with the lack of resources for Hispanic women. Now, I say I was selfish then because I was only thinking about my identity as a Hispanic woman. I was not also being inclusive of other identities. I wasn't being inclusive of people with disabilities. I wasn't being inclusive of Black community members. I wasn't being inclusive of LGBTQ plus community members. And in advocating for ourselves, we should also look to advocate for others, even if we do not hold that identity. Does that make sense? Awesome. So I have a really, a quote by Audre Lorde, who says that you don't have to be me for us to stand together. And so all of you don't have to have the same experiences as all of the people that are within your hall, but that doesn't mean you can't also stand alongside them and advocate for them. But that requires you to think beyond your own identity. That requires you to advocate for people with intersecting identities. Awesome. So obviously somebody already said this. Why are we here? Because we want to develop community. You have to serve as a role model, maintain an environment conducive to success, and serve as a resource and provide referrals as needed, perform administrative and operational duties. These are all of your duties as RAs. Did I miss anything here? Awesome. So I would argue that this is why we have to talk about DE&I, because you cannot build and develop community without that community being inclusive and equitable. You cannot serve as a role model if you are not advocating for equitable spaces, equitable policies. And you also have to do it because we're Mountaineers, right? All of us have made this commitment to this institution. We like to go out and call ourselves Mountaineers. We like to wear our WVU t-shirts and have WVU flags in our rooms, but I want to highlight this about the WVU mission. If any of you have taken some time to go look at the WVU mission, this is what it states about the work that you as students and the responsibility that you as students have to this institution. Students at West Virginia University commit to creating a diverse and inclusive culture. So this is not something that you get to do sometimes. This is not something that you get to do only when you feel like it. This is the mission of the institution that you have chosen to give Boku bucks to. You said, WVU, I'm going to throw major cash at you. What do you want me to do? And WVU said this. Does that seem fair? Everybody still with me? Anybody asleep yet? Scrolling through Twitter, Instagram, Netflix? All right. So anybody ever heard of the term implicit bias? Yes, no, maybe so. We've got some folks nodding. Okay, what does it mean? Help me define it.
Summit has something.
Okay, do y'all hear me? Okay, it's like a bias that you don't know you have.
Yeah, a bias that you don't know you have. Awesome. I love it, Summit. Thank you so much. Exactly. So implicit bias are the unconscious attitudes, stereotypes, and unintentional actions. These can be positive or negative towards a group or members of a group merely because of their membership in that group. Now, our implicit biases, because all of us have implicit biases. If I were to say, here's a cookie and here's a muffin, you wouldn't have to think, you would just know which one you wanted. Right? So all of us hold implicit biases towards certain things because they're developed over the course of a lifetime through exposure to things like direct and indirect messaging. Can anybody tell me the percentage of our biases that are unconscious biases or implicit biases? I see clapping. Is that meant to mean something? Oh, we've got a thumbs up. What does it mean, folks at Summit? Jasmine Jones.
Check the chat.
Oh, check the chat. All right. 50% we've got.
Let's go, Lyric.
What else? Anybody else got more percentages? I've got the chat open now.
We're
9
saying higher.
plus.
Higher.
Okay, who else? We've got 90 plus in the chat. We're going with 50 or 90 plus? Anybody else? 75. All right, so our solid number is 90. About 90% of the decisions that we're making throughout a day, our actions in one day, are 90% of them are unconscious. That means that we're not consciously deciding to like or dislike. We don't have these intentional actions towards a group or members of a group. It means that about 90% of the interactions you're having on a day-to-day rely on our experiences or forms of direct or indirect messaging that are developed over the course of a lifetime. So where do our implicit biases come from? We've talked about them being through direct and indirect forms of messaging. Can anybody tell me what those direct or indirect forms of messaging are?
All right, Summit has something.
Do our implicit biases, don't they come from like our upbringing and our environment?
Yeah, our upbringing and our environment. Who else? The media. That's great. What else? Where else?
We have an answer from Caroline in honor. Oh, okay, sounds good. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Just like societal norms that we just found.
Societal norms?
Yeah,
Awesome. What kind of societal norms?
the people we're around will tend to pick up on what they think over time, especially if you spend a lot of time with them and you'll start to think like they do.
Yeah, and so we start to create these micro communities. Maybe all of you have created them as RAs to decide what is acceptable and what is not within your community, and what helps your community function more efficiently. But as we start thinking about societal norms, I want you to think about who is setting those norms and who benefits from those norms and how do they impact the rest of the community. So all of y'all have given really, really phenomenal answers, which are direct messaging and indirect messaging. Direct messaging is somebody saying, this is good, this is bad, this is safe, or this is unsafe. Now think about people in positions of power who have ever told you in your life, this is good or this is bad. This is who we are, this is who we are not. If you've ever had a professor say to you, this is what we do and like in this class, versus this is what we don't like in this class. Think about the things that we like about WVU. Now, I say something like Texas Longhorns, and all of us are like, boo, they're trash, right? Like we automatically don't like them. But that's from this messaging, somebody saying, hey, you know what? Horns down, we don't like them. And it comes from these direct forms of messaging. Now, it could also come from indirect forms of messaging. Maybe you've had family members who are diehard Mountaineers, and they have always hated the Longhorns. And so, you know, on the weekends, a football game is on, a basketball game's on, and these two teams are playing, and you've got an aunt or an uncle, a family member who is cheering against that team. And so they don't have to come out right and say, this team is bad, this team sucks. But you pick up on what they're doing without them necessarily having to explicitly state that. It also comes from, and these are some things that y'all have already mentioned, media. So social media, especially for all of you youths, our peers, personal experiences, religious values, and somebody said societal norms. And so all of you are on the money. I think that means that you no longer have to take this training and you could just log off and go home and take a nap. But as we start thinking about indirect forms of messaging, I want you to start thinking about how we consume information in ways that aren't necessarily somebody explicitly stating something. Let's take, for example, I spent some time in Paraguay as a Peace Corps volunteer. Paraguay is a tiny country in South America. It is a landlocked country, and not a whole heck of a lot of people know about Paraguay. But say my good friend Danielle is looking to travel to South America. And she says to me, hey, Suri, I know you spent some time in South America. I know you spent some time in Paraguay specifically. I'm looking to travel. Can you tell me a little bit about Paraguay? And I say to them, hey, you know what? I really hated it. And the people were this way, and the buses were this way, and it was awful. And my experience was just not the best. And I would not recommend that anybody do that. Now, what happens is my singular experience has an effect on other people. My singular experience has an effect on the decisions those people make. And so now Danielle is saying, she goes over to Jacob, and Danielle says, you know what, Jacob? Well, I have a friend who went to Paraguay and they really did not like it. And they said transportation there is crap and that it's really unsafe and we're never going to be able to see any cool stuff. And so now my personal experiences, your peers' experiences are influencing your behavior. I say that all to mean that we're helping fill in gaps for other people. So as you start thinking about your experience within the state of West Virginia, within WVU Morgantown, within the United States, I want you to think about your experience as being a singular experience. And how is that singular experience influenced by your own identity? If I am saying things like, you know what, Paraguay was trash and I hated it and public transportation is crap. Was that because of my identity in the country? Because I felt unsafe as a woman on public transportation and I'd never been in situations like that before? And what impact will that have on other people? And so I want you to start thinking about, as we start sharing experiences with others, as we start taking in experience from others, think about how our identities are influenced by that and how our identities can impact the way we talk about people. If somebody bumps into me on campus and I'm having a really rough day and I'm kind of short with them, and we all know that this has happened before, and now that individual says, well, you know what, I met Aisuri on campus and she was just not very friendly. She kind of sucks. And now that individual says, you know what, I heard Aisuri sucks. I heard that the folks over at DD&I, they are really boring and they're mean and they're rude and they're all these things. Because one person had a negative experience with me. Does all of that make sense? Who have I lost? Okay, we're gonna keep going. Does that sound okay? Anybody need coffee yet? Somebody's got coffee over there, or vodka maybe. All right, so why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because power is the ability to do something or act in a particular way. There are two types of power. Today, we're going to be mostly talking about one. First, individual and institutional power. Individual power is the power I want us to focus on. This is the ability to access and influence resources, systems, structures, and other individuals. I want all of you to think about the kind of power that you hold, the proximity that you have to other people in positions of power, and how that lets you leverage that power to have a specific kind of privilege. So those with power, or those who hold identities similar to those in power, experience privilege. Privilege is the unearned, unasked for, often invisible benefits and advantages, only readily available to dominant groups. One thing I want to emphasize, two things I want to emphasize rather about privilege. One, privilege doesn't have to mean wealth. Wealth is a form of privilege, but not all people who experience privilege are going to have or be wealthy. Second, just because you don't know you have privilege does not mean you do not have privilege. It's unearned, unasked for, often invisible. And it's only held by 8 certain identities. These are our main 8 social identities. They're gender identity or expression, disability, age, ethnicity, race, sexuality, socioeconomic status, and religion. And while I have them all listed out in different bubbles, I want you to think about our identities as intersecting. I want you to think about your experience as having privilege within these social identities. Now, you don't have to share how that is, but I want us to talk about this video. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing this. And then I'm going to ask you, what do you notice about privilege and having privilege as it's shown in this video? This video is a clip excerpt from the movie Hidden Figures. I see clapping. Is that to get my attention? Okay, we're gonna keep going. If you can't hear it, holler at me, let me know, okay?
Where the hell have you been? Everywhere I look, you're not where I need you to be. It's not my imagination. Now, where the hell do you go every day?
To the bathroom, sir.
The bathroom. The damn bathroom. For 40 minutes a day? What are you doing? T-minus 0. I put a lot of faith in you.
There's no bathroom for me here.
What do you mean there's no bathroom for you here?
There is no bathroom. There are no colored bathrooms in this building or any building outside the West Campus, which is half a mile away. Did you know that? I have to walk to Timbuktu just to relieve myself. And I can't use one of the handy bikes. Picture that, Mr. Harrison. My uniform, skirt below my knees, my heels, and a simple string of pearls. Well, I don't own pearls. Lord knows you don't pay colors enough to afford pearls. And I work like a dog day and night, living off of coffee from a pot none of you want to touch. So, excuse me if I have to go to the restroom a few times a day.
All right, so what are some of the things that you noticed?
We have an answer from Abby.
First off, I love this scene so much, but the sense that one thing is, I think, a huge indicator, especially in the coming scene afterwards, is the ignorance that you can see, like, he had no idea, like, it's not his concern that there's no color bathroom there, that's, well, you know what I mean, like, it's just, he doesn't realize her situation, and it's just not considerate whatsoever.
Yeah, and so what I heard in some of that from Abby is that he doesn't recognize his own privilege, right? And so as we reflect on what privilege is, remember, it's unearned, unasked for, often invisible. And we can see that here. We can see, hey, he doesn't know what kind of access he has to location, to restrooms, to anything. And therefore, that privilege impacts how he views Katherine Johnson's character in the film. He sees now, hey, where are you? You're being lazy, is what he thinks. When in reality, his perception is not that of his own privilege, but instead, and not even of her oppression, but instead categorizes her as something completely different. Is that what I heard from you, Abby?
Yes.
Awesome. What else? What else did y'all notice?
We have an answer over here.
Okay.
Allison. Is it on?
He was singling her out in front of everyone, in a room full of mostly white men. I saw one other woman in that clip, but if it was probably just one of his other coworkers, he would have probably brought them into his office and not embarrassed him in front of a whole group of coworkers.
Yeah, and so now we're calling into question and recognizing gender dynamics, right? Is some of what I heard from Allison. And I want to push that a little bit further in. He is this white man who has had an outburst in front of his colleagues. And we're positioned in society to think about him as being dedicated to his work. But because of the way Katherine Johnson's character responded, now there's this trope and stereotype of, and people looking around and saying, oh, they are an angry Black woman. But that's not how we've categorized him. We have not categorized him as an angry white man. And so as we start thinking about how we associate certain things with people, I want you to think about how much influence society has had on that. What else were some of the folks that people noticed? So far we've noticed gender and we've noticed privilege. What else did we notice?
We have another answer over here.
So she speaks about how she is underpaid. This could be for two different reasons. One, that she's a woman, and also she's a person of color. And he doesn't seem to be considerate of that. And he's her boss, so he kind of does have control over her pay. And he's just like, oh, why can't you even afford to get to the restroom in time?
So what I heard over there is the intersections now of gender and race. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. And so now we see there is another white woman within this space. And that's amazing, right? This white woman, I'm sure, has also faced levels of oppression, forms of oppression. Women in STEM fields in general, right? And we can recognize that. But now we're also calling into question, she's got a race that is intersecting with her identity. And therefore, she's impacted differently. Awesome. Anybody else?
Yep, something in Summit.
Hello. She mentions that she doesn't have a very equitable workplace compared to the other people. Like she doesn't have the resources that she could to succeed in their workplace. like she has to leave for so long to use the bathroom that she doesn't get as much work done as the other people. Because they probably have a bathroom like right in the hallway, but she has to go like half a mile away to even like use the bathroom. So it's just not very equitable.
Yeah, awesome. And I love this. I love that you've encompassed equity as a whole for Katherine Johnson's character, because now we're going to call into question a couple of different things: socioeconomic status, gender, and race. And now I'm going to make the argument. Are the folks in this space, are the white men within this space, are they bad people doing bad things? We could probably say no. They don't intentionally mean to be bad people doing bad things, but, and they are also unaware of the privilege that they hold. And that makes them treat Katherine Johnson's character a very specific way. They see her as lacking. And it's not that she is lacking, but like the folks over at Jasmine Jones's box said, hey, it's because she doesn't have access to resources. This is not a her problem. This is a societal problem. And so as we think about, and as you think about the spaces that you occupy and the spaces in which you have privilege, I want you to stop thinking about problems as individual problems and instead as societal problems. If you have students who live in your dorms and they say, hey, I need access to prayer spaces, how can you challenge that? Maybe you don't have the ability to create a prayer space for them, but you have access to folks who do. You have access to folks like Angela and Javier who can say, hey, you know what? We need this because we have a student who requires a prayer space, meditation space, a reflection room. And you have access to resources, to people, to systems, to structures that can change and create equitable communities. Is everybody still with me? Okay, I see some like mini thumbs up in the background of Jasmine Jones, and I appreciate y'all. All right, so what do our biases impact? Everything. So I want you to start thinking about all of the ways in which you notice person. They even impact your relationship with me. So as you start thinking about your biases now, I'm gonna challenge and say that, hey, it challenges, are your biases affect your perception? So how you see me and perceive me as a reality, our attitudes, how we react towards certain people, are we friendly or unfriendly towards them, our behaviors, our attention, do you pay more or less attention to an individual based on their identity? And that's not to say that any of you are going to say, yeah, girl, I do. Because remember, 90% of our biases are unconscious. And so some of you are going to say, of course, I pay attention to all people equally, but you just can't. It's not possible. You have unconscious biases that keep you from doing that. That's why we have to have conversations like this, so that next time you engage with somebody and you start to recognize these are the biases that I'm affected by, you start to check yourself. So they also affect our listening skills. Maybe some of you would listen differently if the person in my seat was a man or was of a different race or ethnicity. Our micro affirmations, how much or how little we comfort certain people in certain situations. We know that women are less likely to receive medicine for pain than men are. We know Black women are even more marginalized. And so this is not me saying, hey, these are bad people because they receive medicine. No, it's me saying we know that these numbers are true, and we know that our micro affirmations impact how much medical treatment or validation people receive. And so as you go on to be doctors and lawyers and healthcare workers and all of the fancy things that all of you are going to do, I want you to remember how you are impacting the lives of others. So a couple of misconceptions about privilege before we keep going. This is not a session where I tell all of you who have experienced privilege, or even telling myself, because I experience privilege in certain spaces, that we are bad people doing bad things. It's not to mean that we haven't worked hard. It doesn't mean that certain identities haven't also experienced oppression. I want us to remember those intersecting identities. Having privilege doesn't mean you shouldn't take pride in your accomplishments. And instead, having privilege is an acknowledgement of systemic injustices and working towards equity every single day. If we think about the Hidden Figures clip, it's not to make those men feel terrible, to feel like they're bad people doing bad things, or saying like you don't deserve to be at NASA, or you also haven't experienced oppression based on some of your other identities. Maybe some of them are LGBTQ plus community members and they can't be out LGBTQ plus community members, or they are different religious affiliations and they can't practice that. We don't know. And instead, it's to say, hey, we can all work towards developing equitable spaces here. On the other hand, we have oppression. So this is the systemic devaluation, marginalization, and disadvantaging of certain social identities. The denial of some people things of value while others are given readily access. One of the things that comes to mind as an example here is the Supreme Court decision to legalize same-sex marriage. Maybe some folks didn't recognize, hey, I have access to this, while others face oppression and not being allowed to marry who they love. We have a tendency to think in terms of physical oppression, so things like enslavement and the Holocaust. But in many ways, it's nearly invisible. Think about, again, the Katherine Johnson clip, the Hidden Figures clip, where, hey, it's not necessarily tangible that she's being paid differently. That's not something that we outright see until Katherine Johnson's character tells us, but it is still a form of oppression. There are two types of oppression that I want to discuss: overt and covert. Overt is open, it's observable, it's not secret or hidden. And as some of you look at these images, you're like, wow, this is Yikes on Bikes. These are bad. The target of the overt oppression is very aware of the intention and action and of the oppressive group. But we also have covert oppression, which is secret, it's hidden, it's not openly practiced, and it's so subtle that it's not readily obvious. Here we have three images from left to right. For those of you who the images are hard to see on your screen, we have the Atlantic slave trade between the 15 and 1800s, brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. In the middle image, we have Summer Glow by Dove, nourishing lotion for normal to dark skin. And then on the final image, going clockwise, we have a Black presenting woman who says, I am an African-American woman. A white presenting woman says, I am a future doctor. A Black presenting man, I value equity. A white presenting woman, I am a future corporate financier. What are some of the things that you notice about these images?
We have an answer here. Good, Jenna.
Song, okay. Yeah. So I think the most obvious one is the Dove one, the Summer Glow. Normal to dark skin, that just made me cringe. Like, normal skin is everyone's skin. Like, it should say like fair instead, because it's just like a very, like, pale to dark skin would be more appropriate, but normal is just so wrong.
Yeah, I love that, right? And so it would be abnormal if you didn't have skin, should be what we're thinking of in this case. But all of us, I'm sure, have been socialized enough that whenever we see the word normal within this context, we recognize that it equates to whiteness. And so is Dove a racist company doing racist things? Maybe, probably, I don't know. But in this scenario, they are not trying to overtly be harmful with this context of normal to dark skin. And instead, if all of us start seeing this kind of marketing and imaging and contexts on the shelves of Target, it starts to be ingrained in us that whiteness is normalness. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else?
Daniela has something as well. Go ahead.
For the one that I'm assuming is like a history textbook, it says like they brought millions of workers to work on plantations. A little more accurate would be like they brought millions of like Africans to be like slaves to like forced labor. It's making it seem like
they chose to get on a ship and go work somewhere to be paid instead of like being forced against their will.
Yeah, and so in that case, we have this changing of history. Now, this is a 2014 textbook out of the state of Texas, McGraw-Hill textbook. And this is not me saying, yo, McGraw-Hill's trying to be racist. I don't know if they are or are not. And instead, this changing of history, all of us had to take some form of US history. And all of us probably came upon a phrase similar to this one. Whenever they were not workers, they were people who had been kidnapped and enslaved. They were people who were doctors, lawyers, mothers, fathers, sisters. They had accomplished lives, and they were kidnapped to be made forcibly work in the United States. Awesome. Jasmine Jones, I see you.
Never mind. What we were gonna say was just said.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jasmine Jones. Anybody else? Okay, so on this final image, this is from a 2019 NCAA Diversity and Inclusion in Athletics campaign that came out of the University of Missouri. This is not me saying bad people doing bad things. And instead, if we tell stories like these, the ones that are presented on your screen, it becomes the norm. It becomes this indirect form of messaging that we're receiving. Remember how we talked about indirect forms of messaging that impact our implicit biases? That's what I'm talking about within this case. These are indirect forms of messaging. Now, microaggressions, what do they have to do with implicit bias? Microaggressions are the everyday slights, indignities, put downs, and insults that people of color, women, LGBTQIA+ populations, people with disabilities, or those who have been marginalized experience in their day-to-day interactions. These can also be unconscious. So as you start thinking about implicit bias, I want you to think about microaggressions too. Can often seem as a compliment, but can contain a hidden insult. Here are some examples. Now, this is not an all-encompassing list. And if you start reflecting on your life and the things that you've said, and you recognize that you've said some of these things, then I want you to think about how you can change that language and how you can change that behavior. So asking a student of color which scholarship they received, helping a wheelchair user without asking if they need assistance, trying to finish the sentence for a person with a stutter, whistling at a woman, engaging in behavior that does not validate the experience of other people. For example, colorblindness. I don't need any of you to be afraid of my brownness. I'm brown, I know I'm brown. And somebody saying to me, well, I don't see you as brown, is not helpful, because how people treat me is influenced by the way that they see me. And so to validate my experience, I need you to see my brownness. I need you to legitimize that. Repeatedly asking someone where they were born or where they're from, or being complimented for speaking English well or being articulate. I would challenge that these microaggressions are a way to make people feel othered. I often get this question of, hey, where are you from? No, really, where are you from? And I really, really, really admire the first person who ever straight up said to me, I'm gonna ask you where you're from because I don't see a lot of Hispanic folks in Morgantown. And I was so thankful that they said that to me. Because for the first time, somebody said, I recognize that you are not necessarily what is seen around the community, but they were honest about what they meant. Instead of the people that tried to get to that question by asking other styles of question that are made supposedly to make me feel less uncomfortable. And so I want you to think about, if you're engaging with folks, if you're having conversations like these, if you overhear folks having conversations like these, what's the question meant to do? Is it meant to make people feel othered? Here's an example of microaggression. Are y'all too young for Mean Girls? All right, here's an example.
Well, I just wanted to let everyone know that we have a new student joining us. She just moved here all the way from Africa.
Welcome. I'm from Michigan.
So what are some of the things you notice?
Summit has something.
Tina Fey's character kind of assumed that it was the character or person of color that was the new person from Africa.
Yeah, and specifically she turns to this black lady and says, "You are black, therefore I associate you as not belonging within the space. I associate you to a specific continent." What else? I saw Angela, you also unmuted?
Yes, Elise, oh, was that what you were gonna say? Okay, we're good.
Awesome. Okay. And so that's what I want you to start thinking about. Maybe Tina Fey, like, she didn't mean to be a bad teacher, right? But still, this passive aggressive comment. We're going to skip this because I think we're coming up on time. So what are some of the things that you could do? Prepare for situations like this. They're going to happen. As leaders who have made a commitment to creating community, to ensuring the success of other students, it's important for you to prepare to have difficult conversations. What are you going to say whenever you hear uninclusive language? Are you going to develop a space that people who have engaged in this kind of behavior are learning from it? Or are you simply going to yell at them because it's the easiest thing to do? Think about why the microaggression has been made. Was it to mark difference? What do you identify as being the issue? I want you to always think about the experiences of those most affected. This is not a time for people who have privilege to center themselves. And instead, it's important for us to center the people who the microaggression has been committed against. Develop rapport with individuals. Are you engaging in activities around identity and experience? Are each of you creating spaces where people can explore their identities, where they can talk about their identities freely, openly, and without judgment? And how do your own experiences shape your perspective? Develop awareness of your own stereotypes, biases, or assumptions by going online and taking the Harvard Implicit Association Test. I've dropped that in the chat, the name of that in the chat. But as you take the Harvard Implicit Association Test or after, it may tell you, hey, you have a preference for this group of individuals. Sit with that and then try and figure out how to be better, how to remove that preference. Action versus inaction. So as a leader, people are always going to be looking to you to respond. Are you being inclusive of all people with your response? Remember, a delayed response is better than no response. It's okay to have people to tell somebody, hey, I'd really like to talk to you about this. I saw it happen last week. I want to talk about what I thought about it. I would go further and challenge each of you to hold each other accountable. Because I'm not saying all of us are perfect people doing perfect things just because you're RAs. And instead, there might be some microaggressions that you commit. And it might be up to some of your colleagues, coworkers, friends, fellow mountaineers to hold you accountable. Be comfortable with somebody challenging that. I've had colleagues, friends, coworkers challenge me, even within this role. Develop responses that are going to work. If you feel uncomfortable challenging the act that has happened in the moment, one of the things that works really well for me is I ask questions. And so if I see somebody engaging in uninclusive behavior or somebody's committing a microaggression towards me, some of the things that work for me are following up with, what do you mean by that statement? Why did you use that kind of language? What point are you trying to make? Get that person to talk a little bit about what they're saying and what explicitly they mean. Remember, model behavior, reach out to other folks on campus. If you don't know what to do, talk to your advisors, professors, or great folks over at the DDEI office if you need any help. I think we're up on our 50 minutes. And so I know the great Sam Wilmoth already went over being an active bystander with you. All of you have a responsibility to report. Here it is again. And that's it for me, folks. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns? I can drop my email in the chat, or you can get it from Angela or Javier if y'all need it. But other than that, I think I have to let you go.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Smart. I see some folks like nodding, like, yes, girl, you have to let us go. We don't like you no more. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I really, really appreciate your time. Best of luck this year. If there's anything that y'all need from me at any point or the division as a whole, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. Thank you so much, y'all.